Hey travelers, picture a world where winter wasn't an inconvenience, it was a predator. A world where a single night could freeze your breath solid, where families slept packed together like firewood, and where people kept cows inside the house because their body heat meant the difference between life and death. No fireplaces roaring, no insulated walls, no modern comfort, just ingenuity, fear, and the relentless cold of the Middle Ages. A time when winter shaped every meal, every prayer, and every heartbeat until spring returned. So before we step inside these smoke-filled cottages and uncover the raw, chilling truths of medieval winter survival, light your candle, settle in, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we explore the coldest secrets ever endured by the people who refused to freeze. In the winter of 1408, much of Europe lay beneath a shell of ice. Chronicles from Flanders, England, and the German states describe rivers frozen so solid that carts crossed them as though they were roads. This period belonged to what scholars now call the Little Ice Age, an era of colder temperatures and harsher winters that began in the late Middle Ages. The shift followed the warmer centuries of the medieval warm period, and its effects were recorded by monastic scribes who noted failed harvests, early frosts, and nights so cold that livestock perished where they stood. Climate research confirms these descriptions, showing measurable drops in European temperatures beginning in the 14th century. Against this backdrop, the survival of ordinary people depended not on advanced technologies, but on knowledge passed down through generations. Medieval winter survival was a daily negotiation with the elements, shaped by architecture, clothing, social habits, and the careful management of heat. A typical rural home in the colder regions of Europe provides a window into this world. These dwellings were usually built of wattle and daub, rough stone, or heavy timber. The walls were thick, not for beauty, but for insulation. Medieval builders understood, through experience rather than physics, that dense materials trapped heat better than thin planks. The roofs were steep to shed snow and thatched with straw, a material that functioned surprisingly well as insulation when kept dry. Such houses had few windows, openings were small, often covered with wooden shutters or pieces of oiled parchment during winter. The purpose was not simply privacy or defense, but conservation of heat in a climate where every draft could be dangerous. Inside, the most important feature was the central hearth, before chimneys became common in the later Middle Ages. Smoke from the fire rose into the rafters and escaped through gaps in the thatch or through a wooden roof vent. This created a permanent haze in the living space. Eyes watered, lungs burned, and soot settled on clothing and furniture. Yet this arrangement was widespread. The smoke helped preserve the thatch by discouraging pests and slowing rot. And the central placement of the hearth distributed heat as evenly as possible in a world where temperatures could plunge dramatically after sunset. A medieval home was rarely heated to what modern people would call comfort. Instead, people aimed to survive the night without letting the indoor temperature drop low enough to threaten life. The hearth provided radiant heat within a limited radius, creating a warm core in the otherwise frigid interior. Families gathered close to the flames at dusk to prepare the evening meal, usually a thick pottage of grains and vegetables. Hot food was both nourishment and a way to raise the body's internal temperature before the long night ahead. One reason these small houses retained heat as well as they did came from their other occupants. In many agricultural regions, livestock and humans lived under the same roof. A low partition or half-wall separated the family's living area from the animal's stall. Cows, goats, sheep, and even pigs generated significant body heat. Studies of medieval biohouses show that the presence of 2 or 3 cattle could noticeably raise the temperature on freezing nights. Beyond warmth, this arrangement protected valuable animals from theft, predators, and exposure. It also ensured that their heat contributed to the household's survival rather than dissipating uselessly into a cold barn. As daylight faded, the careful management of fire took precedence. Firewood was expensive, not because it was rare everywhere, but because harvesting and transporting it required time and labor. In many areas, forests were regulated by manorial law. Rights to gather deadwood or cut green wood were tightly controlled, and penalties existed for taking more than one share. A family might ration its fuel supply with great precision. Before bed, embers were banked under layers of ash to keep them smoldering until morning. This practice conserved fuel and avoided the need to start the fire from scratch each day. Clothing constituted another indispensable survival tool. Medieval people layered garments in ways that modern cold weather experts would recognize as effective. The first layer was almost always linen, prized for its ability to wick moisture away from the skin. Over this came wool, tunics, gowns, or hose. Wool, with its natural crimp and insulating properties, trapped warm air close to the body. In the coldest regions, fur-lined cloaks, hoods, mittens, and boots added further protection. Clothing did not come off simply because someone went indoors. Even at home, people wore multiple layers unless sitting directly beside the hearth. Nighttime attire played an important role. Manuscript illustrations from the 13th to 15th centuries depict both men and women sleeping while wearing long linen shifts and fitted caps. The nightcap, common across Europe, prevented heat loss from the head, which accounts for a significant portion of total body warmth. A hooded cloak or outer garment was often pulled over the bedding for additional insulation. These practices were not luxury but necessity, particularly during winters, documented as severe by contemporary chroniclers. As the time for sleep approached, families retreated from the hearth to the bed. Medieval beds were often raised wooden frames filled with straw, feathers, or wool. Straw mattresses needed regular turning to remain warm and usable. Families typically slept together. Whether a noble household with embroidered pillows or a peasant home with rough woolen blankets, shared sleep was the norm. Combined body heat dramatically improved survival in rooms where temperatures could fall near freezing despite the best efforts to conserve warmth. Dogs sometimes joined to the bed as well, not as pets in the modern sense but as working animals whose heat was welcome. Children slept sandwiched between adults. Elderly family members, at greatest risk from cold, were placed in the warmest spots near the center. The coldest nights required strict routines. Shutters were checked. The door was reinforced with a heavy curtain. The fire was banked, clothing layered, bedding arranged, and livestock settled. Everything was done with the knowledge that a single lapse could mean frostbite or death. Medieval people did not fear winter as a poetic symbol, but as a real adversary. The strategies used in these homes formed the foundation of medieval winter survival, yet they were only the beginning. Beyond the home itself lay networks of communal support, regional variations in architecture, specialized bedding techniques, and countless practical adaptations. These shaped how people slept, how they organized their families, and how they guarded themselves against the cold. As winter deepened across medieval Europe, the struggle for warmth shifted from the hearth to the bed, a place far more complex than its modern counterpart. Medieval sleep was a social, architectural, and practical system built around the realities of cold nights, limited fuel, and the constant threat of freezing. Surviving the longest hours of darkness required tools, habits, and knowledge that shaped the nightly rhythms of nearly every household, from Scandinavia to the Alpine valleys. The medieval bed served simultaneously as furniture, insulation, and communal shelter. In poorer homes, bedding consisted of a wooden frame or simple platform, raised off the ground to avoid the bitter cold that settled on dirt floors during winter. The mattress, if present, was often a pallet of straw or reeds stuffed into a coarse sack called a tick. Archaeological findings demonstrate that these straw mattresses were renewed several times a year. Fresh straw trapped heat effectively, while old straw became damp, flattened, and dangerously cold. Some households added a second layer of insulation beneath the mattress, such as dried rushes or bracken, materials known to add noticeable warmth. Straw beds were not luxurious, but they were practical. When turned regularly, the loose fibers created small air pockets that helped retain body heat. Medieval household guides, including several 15th century English and French texts, advise families to stir out the straw in winter for health and comfort. Wealthier households used featherbeds, which provided superior insulation, but even these required careful upkeep. Feathers trapped warm air well, yet a featherbed, without sufficient blankets, offered little protection against freezing air. Blankets were the next essential layer. Most were made of thick wool, sometimes woven in multiple plies to increase weight and warmth. Wool's insulating qualities made it one of the most valuable winter textiles in medieval Europe. In inventories from English manors and French farms, woolen blankets appear frequently and were often listed among a family's most prized possessions. Additional covering could include fur throws, sheepskins, or even cloaks repurposed as bedding during severe cold. Household accounts from monasteries and noble manors show that spare cloaks and mantles were commonly sent to sleeping quarters in winter, reinforcing the idea that clothing and bedding functioned interchangeably when survival was at stake. The arrangement of sleepers mattered as much as the material. Most medieval families slept in groups, not from custom or crowding alone, but because collective body heat provided the most reliable defense against cold. Children were placed between adults, who generated more heat. Elderly family members, highly vulnerable to winter exposure, slept closest to the warmest spot on the bed, often near the center. Dogs sometimes occupied the foot of the bed, adding warmth just as livestock warmed the larger house. The term three-dog night, though often associated with later folklore, reflects a long-standing truth. Animals were part of the household heating system. The medieval night consisted of two major segments of sleep. Historical research shows that pre-industrial Europeans typically followed a pattern of first sleep and second sleep. The first began shortly after nightfall and lasted several hours until roughly midnight. People then woke naturally for a period of quiet activity, prayer, conversation, or tending the fire before returning to bed for the second sleep until dawn. This biphasic rhythm served an important thermal purpose. The interlude allowed household members to check the hearth, rebuild the embers if needed, adjust bedding, and ensure vulnerable sleepers remained warm. Chroniclers describe families rising to rekindle fires or to stir the animals when frost thickened the air. The danger of freezing was greatest when temperatures fell sharply after midnight. To prepare for this, families developed routines that minimized exposure. Before going to bed, shutters were firmly closed and, in some regions, stuffed with wool or cloth to block drafts. Doors were covered with heavy curtains or animal hides. In households with limited fuel, the fire was banked carefully so glowing embers would last until morning. In others, especially in northern Europe, clay or stone bed warmers were placed among the blankets. These warmers, heated beside the hearth, could hold residual heat for hours. Their archaeological traces have been found in England, Scandinavia, and Germanic lands. In regions with harsher winters, such as the Alpine territories or Scandinavia, specialized beds offered greater protection. Box beds, built with wooden enclosures and sliding doors or curtains, functioned like miniature rooms within the house. By trapping warm air in a confined space, box beds significantly raised the temperature around the sleepers. Surviving examples from Norway, the Netherlands, Brittany, and Scotland demonstrate that this design persisted for centuries. Some were elevated like cupboards, with small steps leading into them. Once closed, they shielded sleepers from drafts that swept through the main room. Communal living also served as a winter survival strategy. In some rural villages, extended families slept in the same room not only out of necessity, but because shared living quarters conserved heat. Multiple bodies, a single hearth, and a smaller interior space created a microclimate that made winter nights bearable. The northern European sagas, monastic rules, and legal codes all contain references to large households sleeping together during the coldest periods. Even in noble estates, where private chambers existed, servants sometimes slept nearby to maintain warmth and to attend to the needs of the household during the night. Certain nighttime hazards extended beyond the risk of freezing. Winter brought smoke accumulation, as poorly ventilated homes relied on open hearths. Sleeping too close to the fire risked burns or suffocation, while sleeping too far risked hypothermia. Medieval legal records include cases of accidental fires caused by overturned oil lamps or sparks from banked embers, evidence that nighttime heating required vigilance. Thus, the decision about where to place the bed reflected a balance between warmth and safety. Beyond physical strategies, winter nights also shaped social and spiritual life. Prayers specifically intended for protection from cold appear in several medieval collections, suggesting that surviving winter was a shared cultural anxiety. Religious households recited psalms or blessings during the midnight waking period. In rural areas, winter nights fostered storytelling traditions. These gatherings, though centered around hearths rather than beds, reinforced bonds that ensured communal resilience through the hardships of winter. By the time dawn approached, the tasks of survival resumed. Embers were stirred back to flame, blankets shaken out, shutters opened, and animals fed. The warmth generated during sleep carried over into morning labor, and the process began again with the next sunset. Medieval winter survival depended on the combination of architectural design, communal habits, practical bedding, and the constant presence of fire. Each element played a vital role in enduring the coldest hours between dusk and dawn. Survival in a medieval winter depended not only on what occurred inside individual homes, but on how entire communities prepared for, endured, and responded to the cold season. A village was a network of interdependent households, and winter reinforced that interdependence. The coldest months transformed labor patterns, altered social responsibilities, and reshaped daily life. Every action, from storing crops to maintaining pathways between homes, formed part of a coordinated effort to prevent hunger, illness, and freezing. The foundation of communal winter survival lay in food preparation and preservation. Long before the first frost, villagers spent months gathering and storing supplies for the season when fields lay dormant. Grain was stored in raised granaries that protected it from moisture and rodents. Archaeological evidence from England, France, Germany, and the Low Countries shows that granaries often stood on stone piers or wooden stilts, preventing damp air from seeping upward. Rye, barley, and oats served as the backbone of winter sustenance. These grains, once dried and stored properly, could last through the cold months without significant spoilage. Salted and smoked meats formed another essential part of the winter diet. Pigs, slaughtered in late autumn when feed grew scarce, provided lard and preserved pork that could be stored for months. Smokehouses found in rural settlements across Europe demonstrate how communities relied on slow-burning fires to cure meat. Fish, particularly in regions near rivers and coasts, was salted or dried on racks. Cheese production increased before winter, with hard cheeses offering long-lasting nourishment when fresh dairy was unavailable. Vegetables also played a role. Root cellars, excavated beneath houses or dug into nearby hillsides, preserved turnips, onions, leeks, and carrots. Cabbage and other hardy vegetables were fermented into dishes like sauerkraut, which provided valuable nutrients and prevented diseases caused by vitamin deficiency. These stores ensured that, when winter clamped down, households did not depend solely on dwindling grain supplies. Despite careful planning, shortages could still threaten a village. In such cases, communal solidarity became essential. Medieval laws and manorial customs frequently included provisions for assisting the poorest households during harsh winters. Some villages maintained communal grain reserves, known in parts of France and Germany as public barns, which could be distributed in times of crisis. Church tithes, collected throughout the year, often supported charity during winter. Parish priests and monastic houses provided alms, fuel, and food to vulnerable villagers, fulfilling both religious duty and practical necessity. Fuel scarcity posed another challenge. Gathering firewood was labor-intensive and regulated by strict rights. In many regions, forests were controlled by lords who limited access to woodlands. Villagers often collected fallen branches, dead wood, and brush rather than cutting live trees. Communal workdays were sometimes organized to gather and transport winter fuel. In areas with peat bogs, such as Ireland, Scotland, and Flanders, peat bricks replaced or supplemented firewood. Peat cutting was a seasonal labor practice, and families often stored large piles of dried peat for winter. These fuel strategies reveal a deep awareness of local resources and limitations. Maintaining pathways also became a collective concern. Snowdrifts could isolate homes, making it difficult for families to help one another or to reach the church, which served as both a spiritual center and emergency shelter. Villagers used wooden plows or broad shovels to clear central routes. In mountainous regions, roads were reinforced with logs or stones to provide traction for animals and carts. The clearing of communal roads ensured that critical connections remained open during winter storms. Social networks strengthened as the nights grew colder. Neighbors checked on one another, especially on the elderly, widowed, or infirm. Medieval court records and parish documents include references to watch nights during severe weather, when families took turns ensuring vulnerable villagers remained warm. In some communities, families shared hearth space during the bleakest weeks, with multiple households gathering in a single, better insulated home. Winter also redefined labor. Agricultural work slowed dramatically, allowing time for indoor tasks essential to survival. Men repaired tools, sharpened blades, and tended livestock housed in byres and barns. Women spun wool, wove cloth, mended garments, and prepared preserved foods for daily meals. These tasks were not merely busy work, but critical measures to ensure that families emerged from winter with functioning tools, adequate clothing, and enough supplies to reach spring. Livestock required special attention. Animals provided not only food and labor, but also warmth, and their survival was inseparable from the family's own. Stalls were lined with fresh straw, and animals were fed carefully measured rations to keep them warm and healthy. In regions like Scandinavia and the Alps, communal barns housed entire herds, with families working together to maintain the large structures, and to manage the intense labor of keeping dozens of animals alive through sub-zero temperatures. Winter hardships influenced social rhythms and religious practices as well. Advent and Christmas, situated during the darkest part of the year, took on a dual meaning: spiritual reflection intertwined with communal hopefulness. Candlelight processions, vigils, and feast days offered warmth, food, and social gathering places for villagers hungry not only for sustenance but for human connection. Churches, often the sturdiest buildings in the village, became refuge during extreme cold spells. Their stone walls held warmth from hours of candle burning and the bodies of congregants seeking comfort. In extreme weather, survival sometimes depended on improvisation. Chronicles describe families who brought heated stones from the hearth to their beds to stave off freezing. Some carried small embers in portable clay braziers during nighttime tasks. In the far north, reindeer skins or sealskin garments offered critical insulation when wool proved insufficient. Each region adapted to its environment with remarkable ingenuity. Communal cooperation became most visible during weather disasters. Years of record-setting cold, such as the winter of 1316 during the Great Famine, or the brutal season of 1434, when rivers froze solid across the Low Countries, tested every household. During these winters, migrations occurred as families sought shelter with relatives or in monasteries. Authorities organized emergency distributions of grain, and local courts sometimes suspended taxes or labor obligations to prevent social collapse. Such actions reveal that winter survival extended far beyond domestic strategies. It required coordinated responses across entire communities. By late winter, when supplies dwindled and fatigue weighed heavily on villagers, the communal bonds forged during the coldest months often determined who endured until spring. Winter was not only a season but a test of resilience, solidarity, and resourcefulness. While architecture, communal cooperation, and bedding formed the core of winter survival, medieval Europe also developed a wide array of practical tools and technologies designed specifically to combat the brutal cold. These inventions varied by region, material availability, and social status, yet all served a single purpose: to retain precious warmth during the coldest days and nights of the Little Ice Age. Their development illustrates both the creativity and the limitations of medieval households faced with hostile temperatures and scarce fuel. Among the most essential devices were basic bed warmers. These simple but effective tools existed in multiple forms. The most common type involved metal or clay pans filled with embers from the hearth. The pan was placed under the bed covers shortly before sleep, warming the straw or feather mattress. Archaeological discoveries from England, Germany, and Italy reveal many such bed warmers, often with long handles to prevent burns. Another version used heated stones wrapped in cloths or placed in wooden boxes pierced with small holes. These stones, warmed beside the fire during the evening, retained heat for hours and were safer than ember-filled pans. Although modest in design, these devices transformed icy bedding into a tolerable space for rest. Portable braziers also played a significant role. Made of bronze, iron, or clay, braziers provided direct radiant heat and could be moved from room to room. They were particularly common in Mediterranean regions, though examples appear throughout Europe. A brazier could warm a small enclosed space more efficiently than an open hearth, especially in homes lacking chimneys, where smoke could fill the air quickly. However, braziers required careful handling, as they carried the risk of fire and suffocation if used without proper ventilation. In Northern Europe, innovations in domestic architecture further enhanced winter survival. Scandinavian households frequently employed the stove room, a chamber heated by a large masonry stove. These stoves, precursors to the tiled stoves of the Renaissance, used dense stone or brick to retain heat long after the fire had died. Once the stones absorbed enough warmth, they radiated heat slowly, maintaining a comfortable temperature throughout the night. Surviving examples in Norway, Sweden, and the Baltic region show how efficiently these stoves heated enclosed spaces without excessive smoke. Another highly effective device was the hooded fireplace. Found in parts of France, the German states, and Scotland, these fireplaces featured a stone or timber hood above the fire that funneled smoke upward, allowing more heat to remain in the room instead of escaping through the roof. Unlike the open central hearths common in early medieval homes, hooded fireplaces required more skilled construction but offered substantially better heat retention. Their adoption marks a significant improvement in medieval domestic comfort. The widespread introduction of chimneys during the later Middle Ages also transformed household heating. Early chimneys appeared as simple vents or flues built into the wall, drawing smoke upward more efficiently than roof holes or louvers. As masonry skills expanded in the 13th and 14th centuries, chimneys became more reliable, enabling households to place fireplaces against walls rather than in the center of the room. This development gradually shifted the layout of medieval homes and made winter heating safer and more effective. While many rural homes retained open hearths well into the 15th century, the chimney's rise signaled a long-term improvement in winter survival strategies. Windows, too, underwent innovations aimed at preserving heat. In wealthier homes, glass panes began to appear in small sections during the late Middle Ages. Although expensive and limited in size, glass reduced drafts significantly compared to shutters or parchment coverings. In colder climates, windows were sometimes fitted with wooden shutters lined with cloth or fur. These layers trapped heat and blocked the bitter night winds that could slip through even tightly fitted boards. Medieval clothing also benefited from technological refinement. People relied heavily on wool, a fiber naturally suited to cold climates. Spinning wheels, which spread gradually through Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries, allowed for faster production of fine wool yarn. This improvement encouraged thicker and more consistently woven garments. In regions where winters were particularly severe, such as the Alps or the Carpathian Mountains, households produced multi-layered garments made from felted wool, which offered exceptional insulation. Fur-lined clothing served as another winter technology. Contrary to later stereotypes, fur was not reserved solely for nobility. Though fine furs such as ermine or sable were symbols of high status, more common pelts, sheepskin, rabbit, fox, and marten were widely used by rural families. Many medieval coats and cloaks included detachable linings so they could be worn in both mild and harsh weather. Records from Scandinavia, Poland, and Russia reveal a vibrant trade in winter pelts that circulated throughout the continent. Heat conservation techniques supplemented these technologies. Among the most widespread was the use of heavy curtains hung around beds, doorways, or even along walls. These curtains helped trap body heat in smaller spaces, a vital function in drafty wooden homes. Tapestries served a similar purpose in wealthier households. Although admired today as decorative art, medieval tapestries were originally valued for their insulation. Floor coverings also contributed to warmth. Rushes or straw was spread across floors in many households, replaced periodically to prevent rot and odors. These layers provided insulation underfoot and helped retain heat near the ground. In castles and wealthier homes, woven rugs or animal skins lined floors, offering additional protection against cold seeping upward from stone foundations. Even cooking tools had winter-specific importance. Iron cauldrons, often hung above the hearth for long, slow cooking, allowed families to prepare hot meals throughout the day with minimal fuel. Warm food increased body temperature and morale, factors crucial to enduring long winters. The efficiency of medieval cookware, heavy pots, clay ovens, and long-handled ladles reflected centuries of adaptation to environments where energy preservation was essential. Across Europe, these devices and methods reveal a society well attuned to its climate. Medieval people were not passive victims of winter, but active problem solvers who crafted an array of tools suited to their needs. Their technologies were humble by modern standards, yet sophisticated in their understanding of heat, airflow, insulation, and fuel economy. The ingenuity of these devices becomes even more striking when viewed against the backdrop of the Little Ice Age. When winters grew harsher and more unpredictable, tools such as bed warmers, braziers, insulated clothing, box beds, and masonry stoves helped countless families survive temperatures that could otherwise have been fatal. These innovations showed that medieval winter survival relied not only on community and architecture, but on a deep knowledge of materials and heat management. Winter in the Middle Ages brought more than discomfort. It carried a distinct set of medical challenges that shaped how people understood the human body and how communities sought to prevent or treat illness. Cold weather intensified existing ailments, produced new dangers, and influenced medical theory in ways that reveal the era's complex blend of observation, tradition, and religious belief. Surviving the coldest nights required not only physical protection, but also knowledge, however limited, of how the body responded to winter's assault. Medieval European medicine rested largely on Galenic theory, inherited from the ancient world. According to this system, the body contained four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bilage, associated with specific qualities. Cold was believed to thicken the humors, encourage the growth of phlegm, and weaken the body's internal heat. As winter descended, medical texts warned of illnesses caused by excess coldness, including lethargy, stiff joints, respiratory distress, and digestive problems. Cold was more than a sensation. It was a physiological force that disrupted the balance required for health. The lungs were considered especially vulnerable. Medieval physicians believed cold air entered the body and chilled the chest, leading to coughs, pneumonia-like conditions. Contemporary chronicles often describe spikes in sickness after sudden frosts. While lacking modern understanding of viruses or bacteria, medieval communities recognized patterns. Cold, damp weather produced more coughing, weakness, and death among the elderly and very young. Frostbite, though rarely named in medical texts, appears in legal documents and monastic records. Descriptions of blackened flesh, dead fingers, and rotting toes indicate clear awareness of the condition. Shepherds, hunters, and travelers faced the greatest risk. Remedies for frozen limbs included rubbing the affected area with snow in attempt to warm gradually and applying warm oils mixed with herbs. Some texts explicitly warned against plunging frozen extremities into hot water, a notable insight that aligns with modern understanding of frostbite treatment. The hearth played a central role in preventing illness. Warmth supported the body's natural heat, a concept medieval physicians believed necessary for digestion, blood flow, and mental clarity. When the fire failed or fuel grew scarce, illness became more likely. Court rolls from several English manors mention cases where the elderly died in unheated rooms during severe winters, demonstrating that even small differences in warmth could determine survival. Clifton was considered a medical tool as much as a practical necessity. Layers of wool, linen, and fur were believed to strengthen the vital heat and protect organs. Hoods and caps were especially important because the head was thought to be the seat of vital spirits. Medical treatises advised keeping the head and feet warm to maintain health, a belief reflected in widespread use of nightcaps, woolen socks, and fur-lined footwear during winter months. Diet shifted with the seasons in ways informed by medical theory. Foods classified as hot and moist such as pottage warm ale, spiced wine, and roasted meats were recommended during winter. Garlic, onions, leeks, cinnamon, ginger, and pepper were valued for their warming properties, not simply their taste. Households that could afford spices used them liberally in winter dishes. Even poorer families incorporated warming herbs like mustard, parsley, and horseradish into meals. Warm drinks such as mulled ale or spiced cider appeared frequently in winter celebrations, reinforcing both morale and bodily heat. Hot stones, bed warmers, and braziers, described previously as tools, also carried medical significance. Warmth applied to the feet or chest was believed to stimulate circulation and counteract humoral imbalance. In wealthier households, small medicinal sachets filled with warming herbs, rosemary, sage, lavender, and thyme were placed near the bed. These were thought to strengthen the heart and purify the air, especially during winter when windows remained closed. The church contributed to winter medical care through rituals and charity. Priests offered blessings for protection against cold and illness. Some regions held community vigils on the longest nights of winter, praying for the sick and distributing bread, ale, and warm clothing. Monasteries maintained infirmaries where the poor and elderly found shelter during extreme weather. In many villages, the church served as the warmest building available, heated by candles, baldies, and stone walls that retained heat throughout long vigils or feast days. Midwives and local healers carried practical knowledge that complemented scholarly medical theory. These practitioners treated winter ailments with poultices, teas, and oils derived from plants known to relieve cold-related symptoms. Warm honey mixed with herbs soothed sore throats. Steam from boiling mint or rosemary was inhaled to clear congested lungs. Thick salves made from animal fat and medicinal plants treated cracked skin, chilblains, and joint stiffness. Although rooted in tradition rather than scientific method, many of these remedies offered real relief. Illness during winter could also threaten a fragile food supply. If a family member fell sick and could not perform essential tasks tending livestock, maintaining the fire, preparing meals, the entire household suffered. For this reason, community networks became vital. Neighbors shared chores, delivered warm food, and checked on vulnerable families. Parish records from England and Germany describe organized efforts to care for the sick during harsh winters, suggesting that survival often depended on collective action. Children faced particular danger. Their smaller bodies lost heat quickly, making them more susceptible to illness. Historical documents describe parents placing infants near warm stones, wrapped in cloth, or keeping them in fur-lined cradles close to the hearth. In some regions, cradle hoods made of wicker or wood shielded infants from drafts. These adaptations, simple yet effective, revealed that medieval families understood the physical vulnerabilities of childhood and took measures to protect their youngest members. Mental health also shifted during winter. The season's darkness and isolation influenced emotional well-being. Chronicles and religious commentaries note increased melancholy during long, sunless weeks. Medieval thinkers attributed this to imbalance of the humors, particularly an excess of cold, dry black bile. Remedies included warm baths, communal gatherings, music, and storytelling activities that provided both warmth and emotional relief. The fireside became a place not only of bodily survival, but of psychological comfort, where stories, songs, and shared experiences eased the burdens of winter. Ultimately, medieval approaches to cold-related illness reflected both limitations and wisdom. Lacking modern science, communities nevertheless developed effective strategies grounded in observation. Warm food, layers of clothing, controlled heating, and communal care. These practices, combined with spiritual support and traditional remedies, helped families survive winters that modern observers might consider nearly unbearable. The coldest season exerted a powerful influence over every aspect of medieval life, extending well beyond domestic survival and health. Winter shaped agricultural cycles, economic stability, trade, labor, and even political relationships. When temperatures dropped, medieval society entered a delicate balance where miscalculations, natural disasters, or prolonged cold spells could threaten the overall stability of entire regions. The Little Ice Age intensified these pressures, amplifying the consequences of winter in ways still evident in chronicles and economic records. Agriculture formed the backbone of medieval economies. The vast majority of the population depended on the land for both food and income. Winter did not simply pause agricultural activity. It dictated the rhythm of the entire year. Farmers understood that survival through the cold months depended on successful planning during spring, summer, and autumn. A poor harvest meant a perilous winter, sometimes followed by famine. Winter frost determined which crops could survive and how fields were prepared for the coming season. Grain crops such as rye and wheat were planted in autumn. These winter grains germinated before frost and remained dormant under snow until spring. Their survival required careful timing. If planted too early, they risked disease. If planted too late, frost killed them outright. Medieval farmers relied on generational knowledge to read the weather and determine the ideal planting period. Despite their skill, sudden cold spells or unseasonably early frost could devastate fields. Livestock management also transformed during winter. Cows, sheep, goats, and horses provided milk, wool, labor, and manure essential to agricultural productivity. Their survival through winter determined the success of the following year. Winter fodder hay, straw, and stored grains had to be carefully rationed. In years when summer drought or autumn rains damaged hay supplies, winter deaths among livestock rose sharply. Historical records from monastic estates and manorial accounts detail catastrophic losses during particularly harsh decades of the Little Ice Age, when frozen water sources, deep snow, and insufficient feed created deadly conditions for animals. The economic effects of winter extended beyond agriculture. Many industries depended heavily on seasonal conditions. Millers struggled when rivers froze. Water wheels halted, grinding to a standstill beneath layers of ice. Without flour, bread shortages quickly followed. Blacksmiths, carpenters, wheelwrights, and other craftspeople adapted by focusing on repairs, toolmaking, and indoor work during colder months. Communities often scheduled maintenance or construction of essential equipment, plows, carts, and harnesses during winter, taking advantage of the slower pace in the fields. Markets and trade routes also faced disruption. Snow and ice made travel hazardous. Carts overturned on frozen roads, and pack animals struggled in deep drifts. Merchants timed their journeys to avoid the worst conditions. In mountainous areas such as the Alps or Scottish Highlands, winter travel could cease entirely, isolating remote communities for weeks. Coastal trade experienced winter dangers as well. Storms and rough seas made shipping treacherous. Chronicles from ports in England and the Low Countries record shipwrecks occurring disproportionately during winter storms. Economic hardship increased when cold weather damaged vital infrastructure. Frosty valleys expanding in soil and stone-cracked roads, bridges, and building foundations. Repairs required resources that poorer villagers struggled to supply. In severe winters, frozen wells forced communities to transport water from distant sources, adding labor burdens to households already stretched thin. The psychological effects of winter scarcity influenced social behavior. Anxiety over food supplies, fuel shortages, and livestock survival often heightened tensions within communities. Medieval legal records note increases in theft, particularly of firewood, grain, and animals during harsh winters. Villagers responded by tightening security, organizing patrols, and enforcing strict punishments for resource-related crimes. Winter hardships also encouraged cooperation. When supplies ran low, communities often pooled resources to ensure collective survival. Shared grain reserves, communal meals, and coordinated care for the vulnerable allowed villagers to stabilize themselves during difficult periods. In regions prone to extreme cold, such as Scandinavia and the Alpine territories, oral traditions and legal customs emphasized mutual assistance. Failure to aid a freezing traveler, for example, could carry legal consequences or severe social condemnation. The Little Ice Age intensified these patterns. Beginning in the 14th century, Europe experienced a series of environmental crises, including the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, unusually heavy rains, early frosts, and cold summers triggered widespread crop failure. Grain prices soared, livestock died in enormous numbers, and starvation claimed thousands. Although famines occurred periodically in medieval Europe, the Great Famine marked the moment when climatic conditions overwhelmed even the best survival strategies. Over time, recurring harsh winters strained economic and social structures. In some regions, population decline from famine and disease reduced the available labor force. Fields went unplowed, harvests shrank, and economic production faltered. His scarcity, in turn, altered labor relationships. Serfs gained bargaining power in some places, negotiating lower rents or abandoning unproductive lands. Conversely, in areas where lords retained tight control, winter exacerbated poverty and dependence. Religious and cultural responses helped communities make sense of these challenges. Church teachings interpreted severe winters as divine warnings or tests of faith. Processions, feast days, and ritual fasts were held to seek divine mercy. The church also played an economic role, distributing food and fuel during emergencies. Monasteries, which often possessed substantial stores, assisted surrounding villages by providing bread, ale, and warm shelter. Winter festivals and customs emerged in part to counteract the psychological toll of the season. Celebrations such as Christmas, Epiphany, and Candlemas offered warmth, food, and communal solidarity. These events mitigated fear and reinforced bonds essential for collective endurance. In some villages, winter storytelling traditions flourished, providing both entertainment and cultural continuity during long nights. The cumulative effect of harsh winters influenced political decisions as well. Kings and local lords frequently adjusted taxes or conscription demands when extreme cold damaged crops or reduced labor availability. In other cases, poor winters caused unrest, food riots, protests over grain taxes, and conflicts between landowners and peasants became more common during years of climatic hardship. The relationship between rulers and subjects grew increasingly sensitive to environmental conditions. Winter also shaped military strategy. Armies avoided long campaigns during the coldest months. Food supplies spoiled, horses weakened, and soldiers risked frostbite and disease. Some of the most disastrous military failures in medieval Europe occurred during winter marches, when ice, snow, and starvation forced retreats. Commanders recognized that even a well-trained army could be undone by the season's severity. Ultimately, winter acted as a powerful, ever-present force in medieval life, one capable of shaping economies, altering social hierarchies, and influencing cultural practices. The season tested resilience at every level: household, village, region, and kingdom. Those who survived did so through a combination of preparation, cooperation, and deep respect for the unpredictable climate. Winter demanded adaptation, and societies that learned to read its rhythms endured. To medieval people, winter was more than a natural phenomenon. It was a spiritual landscape, a season woven with symbolism, ritual, fear, and hope. The coldest nights pressed not only against the body but also against the imagination. In a world shaped by Christianity, yet rich with older European traditions, winter inspired a complex mixture of reverence, anxiety, myth, and ceremony. These beliefs did not exist outside daily life. They shaped how people interpreted hardship, understood suffering, and found emotional resilience when the nights grew longest. Christianity provided the dominant framework. Medieval theology regarded the seasons as reflections of divine order. Winter symbolized penance, endurance, and preparation. The rhythm of the liturgical calendar reinforced this perception. Advent for dark weeks, leading to Christmas taught themes of waiting and perseverance, mirroring the physical endurance required to survive the season. The Nativity celebration itself carried profound cultural significance, bringing hope, warmth, and a feast just when winter's grip tightened. By January and February, the religious calendar offered observances designed to sustain morale. Epiphany, with its blessings of homes and gifts of food, provided spiritual renewal. Candlemas, celebrated on February 2nd, marked the midpoint of winter and involved the blessing of candles believed to protect households from darkness and storms. Parishioners carried these blessed candles home, where they were stored for use during harsh weather or illness. These rituals represented more than symbolism. They offered psychological comfort and a sense of protection during nights when survival felt uncertain. Yet beneath Christian practices flowed older layers of winter tradition. Long before the Middle Ages, European cultures told stories to explain the cold, the darkness, and the unpredictable dangers of the season. Many of these beliefs endured well into the medieval period, blending with Christian teachings in ways both subtle and profound. In the Germanic world, winter was associated with the wild hunter spectral procession led by a supernatural figure such as Odin, Woden, or a local legendary king. Chroniclers, folklore collections, and ecclesiastical condemnations refer to this phantom host racing across the sky during winter storms. The wild hunt symbolized both danger and the thin boundary between the living and the dead. Some communities believed that hearing the hunt foretold harsh weather or impending misfortune. Although church authorities attempted to suppress belief in such they persisted as cultural explanations for winter's violent winds and eerie nocturnal sounds. In the Slavic regions, winter folklore featured beings such as the Marana or Mazana, a goddess or spirit associated with death, frost, and the seasonal cycle. Rituals dedicated to banishing winter, including the burning or drowning of straw effigies. He occurred during the late medieval period and symbolized the community's desire for spring to return. Anthropologists and historians record these ceremonies well into the early modern era, suggesting deep cultural continuity. Celtic lands preserved stories of the Cailleach, an ancient winter hag who controlled storms, mountains, and cold. According to tradition, she ruled from Samhain to Beltane, shaping the snow-covered landscape with her staff. Medieval Irish and Scottish folklore treated her as both feared and respected, a figure who embodied the power of winter itself. These myths did not necessarily contradict Christian belief. Instead, they coexisted with it in the daily consciousness of medieval villagers. The Church often tolerated such traditions when they did not undermine doctrine, allowing ancient winter customs to blend with feast days, prayers, and seasonal blessings. Storytelling played a vital cultural role during winter. Long nights encouraged communities to gather around hearths, sharing tales of saints, heroes, monsters, and miracles. Such tales provided entertainment, but also reinforced moral lessons and cultural identity. Winter stories explained natural phenomena, strange noises, unusual weather, their behavior of animals through narratives that carried both wonder and caution. Winter's psychological and emotional demands made these stories particularly important. The cold season isolated villagers, slowed work, increased sickness, and shortened days. Fear of the unknown, of starvation, or of sudden storms permeated daily life. Folklore helped people process these fears. A storm became the wild hunt. Frost became the work of a winter spirit. A sudden thaw became a sign of divine mercy. By personifying winter, medieval people rendered it more comprehensible and less arbitrary. Spiritual practices complemented these narratives. Fasting, prayer, and almsgiving were emphasized during the harshest months, reinforcing communal responsibility. Clergy preached sermons urging compassion toward the poor, who suffered disproportionately in winter. Religious texts described cold as a test of virtue and endurance. Surviving hardship together strengthened social bonds and reaffirmed spiritual identity. Dreams held special significance during winter. Longer nights meant longer hours of sleep and wakefulness, encouraging reflection and introspection. Medieval dream literature often interpreted winter dreams as messages about survival, morality, or divine will. Some physicians believed cold weather induced more vivid dreams because the brain's humors moved differently in winter. Dream interpretation manuals circulated among educated clergy and occasionally filtered into lay culture. Winter also shaped medieval concepts of sin and moral behavior. Several penitential texts warned that idleness during the cold months could lead to temptation or moral decay. To counteract this danger, religious leaders encouraged productive indoor labor, spiritual reading, and communal prayer. These teachings reflected not only moral concerns but practical ones. A household that succumbed to inactivity risked neglecting essential winter tasks. Even light held symbolic importance. With daylight scarce, candles and fire became associated with both physical and spiritual salvation. Churches emphasized Christ as the light in darkness, a message amplified during winter feasts. The physical experience of gathering around a fire echoed the spiritual metaphor of seeking divine warmth amid life's hardships. Liturgical ceremonies involving candles reinforced this connection, creating spaces of light and heat that filled church interiors during the darkest part of the year. Winter influenced burial practices as well. In regions where the ground froze solid, digging graves became difficult. Some communities built temporary structures to house bodies until the earth thawed. Religious leaders prayed for the souls of those who died in the cold, often interpreting winter deaths as especially tragic or spiritually significant. Across Europe, winter shaped not only survival strategies, but worldview. It influenced how families interpreted misfortune, how communities strengthened collective identity, and how individuals found meaning in suffering. The season became a teacher, a threat, and a spiritual challenge. Belief in divine protection, fear of supernatural forces, trust in communal bonds, and hope for renewal interwove to create a psychological framework that sustained people through the coldest months. This spiritual and emotional dimension of winter survival reveals the depth of medieval resilience. Faith and folklore did not merely comfort individuals, they shaped cultural responses that helped communities endure. Winter demanded practical solutions, but it also demanded meaning. In a world where cold could kill as surely as hunger or disease, belief systems anchored the human spirit against the year's darkest days. Across the medieval world, winter stood as a formidable adversary, an annual test of fortitude that shaped architecture, labor, culture, medicine, religion, and social structure. Yet the strategies that allowed communities to endure the coldest nights were not merely reactions to hardship. They reflected a deep reservoir of ingenuity and adaptability. By the closing centuries of the Middle Ages, European societies had developed methods of winter survival so effective and deeply embedded that many persisted for hundreds of years. influencing traditions still recognizable today. The seasonal rhythm of life demonstrated an understanding of nature grounded in observation. Generations of farmers, shepherds, builders, and healers worked within an environment that oscillated between abundance and deprivation. Winter imposed limits, but those limits refined human resilience. Villages developed food storage systems, heating practices, and communal structures capable of withstanding prolonged cold. These systems varied widely across regions, adapting to available resources from peat bogs in Ireland to masonry stoves in Scandinavia. From stone-walled biohomes in the Alps to timber-framed cottages in England and northern France. A consistent theme emerged across these diverse landscapes: collaboration. Medieval winter survival depended on community. No household, however well prepared, existed apart from the shared culture of mutual aid. Villagers pooled grain during shortages, tended to neighbors during illness, cleared snow-blocked pathways, and observed seasonal rituals that reinforced solidarity. These communal bonds helped stabilize societies during the Little Ice Age, when climatic unpredictability threatened both life and livelihood. The endurance of the community often determined the endurance of the individual. Adaptation extended equally to material culture. Winter shaped the development of clothing, bedding, and tools that maximized warmth through locally sourced materials. Wool became one of the most valuable resources of medieval Europe, not only for its insulating properties, but for its durability and availability. Fur linings, thick cloaks, mittens, caps, and layered garments formed a textile technology perfectly suited to environments without centralized heating. Bedding displayed similar sophistication, combining straw pallets, feather mattresses, woolen blankets, and bed curtains to trap body heat effectively. Household design reinforced these technologies. Early medieval homes with central hearths evolved gradually into structures with hooded fireplaces and chimneys. Enclosed sleeping areas, such as box beds, signaled a growing architectural awareness of heat conservation. Even humble cottages exhibited thoughtful construction: small windows, low ceilings, interior partitions, and thick walls designed to combat the cold. These solutions were born not from luxury, but from necessity, and they reveal the remarkable resourcefulness of a society long accustomed to winter's challenges. Winter also acted as a cultural force. It shaped storytelling traditions, religious metaphors, and seasonal rituals that offered psychological resilience. The fear of freezing or famine coexisted with celebrations of light, feasting, and hope. Medieval winter festivals served as communal affirmations of survival, reminding people that darkness and cold were temporary. Folklore, whether the wild hunt racing across stormy skies, or the winter goddess Marana holding dominion over frost, gave symbolic meaning to natural forces, providing emotional structure during periods of vulnerability. Religious practices added another layer of meaning. While Christianity emphasized endurance, charity, and spiritual light in darkness, older traditions contributed to communal rituals that marked the turning of the seasons. Candlemas, Advent, midwinter blessings, and local customs merged theology with practicality, reinforcing social cohesion at the very moment when isolation posed the greatest threat. Sacred and secular practices alike created a psychological buffer against despair, transforming winter from a purely physical challenge into a shared cultural journey. Economically, winter functioned as a reset point. Agricultural labor paused, allowing families to focus on tool repair, textile production, and household maintenance. Although scarcity loomed, these winter occupations strengthened household stability. Medieval records revealed that tasks conducted during the cold months mending plows, weaving cloth, preparing seed stores, crafting wooden implements were essential for the success of the coming agricultural year. Winter survival, therefore, was not passive. It was an active period of preparation, planning, and quiet industry. The season's difficulties also prompted long-term societal responses. Governments and lords modified taxes, rents, and feudal obligations during catastrophic winters. Trade networks adjusted schedules around seasonal hazards. Monasteries maintained grain reserves for public use. Urban centers developed charitable programs to support the poor during winter. Through these measures, medieval Europe demonstrated an early form of adaptive governance and acknowledgement that climate and society were deeply intertwined. The collective experience of winter left a significant legacy. Many aspects of modern winter culture trace their roots to medieval survival practices. The popularity of warm, spiced drinks, the tradition of winter feasts, the use of woolen garments and layered bedding all echo medieval innovations. Even architectural features such as thick walls, compact floor plans, and fireplaces carry the imprint of centuries spent battling the cold. The medieval relationship with winter also offers insight into human resilience. Despite technological limitations, medieval communities created sophisticated systems grounded in cooperation, craft knowledge, and close engagement with the natural world. Their survival techniques reveal that resilience is not defined solely by advanced technology, but by resourcefulness, shared responsibility, and adaptability. The harshest winters, such as those recorded during the Great Famine or the bitter freezes of the 15th century, exposed vulnerabilities inherent in medieval society. Yet these same crises prompted new innovations in farming, storage, architecture, and clothing that gradually improved the ability to endure winter's extremes. In this way, winter functioned as both a threat and a catalyst, driving communities to refine their survival strategies year after year. Ultimately, the story of how medieval people survived the coldest nights is a testament to the depth of human ingenuity. It reflects a world closely attuned to seasonal rhythms, grounded in communal life, enriched by cultural narratives, and sustained through shared labor and faith. Medieval Europe's winters were long, dark, and unforgiving, yet people met them with remarkable creativity. Their efforts ranging from the simple stirring of straw bedding to the construction of stone hearths, from the brewing of warming yerbs to the telling of fireside tallies, reveal a civilization that did not merely endure winter, but learned to live within its boundaries. The lessons embedded in these survival practices continue to resonate today. They remind modern observers that resilience often emerges from community, tradition, and an intimate understanding of the environment. Medieval winter survival demonstrates that even in eras defined by hardship, humanity possesses the capacity to adapt, cooperate, and persevere.